great to be with you. Welcome to our late night garden party here at the Emily Dickinson Museum, Emily Dickinson's home, on this fine Saturday of the 2022 Tell It Slant Poetry Festival. My name is Brooke Steinhauser. I'm program director here at the museum, and I want to extend my gratitude to each of you under this tent who braved this relatively chilly night to be here. And I also want to extend my gratitude to all of you out there, our virtual audience, who are embodying the Dickinsonian principle of enjoying the world by staying at home. Special welcome to all of you out there in the Zoom sphere. This is the 10th anniversary of our poetry festival, and it has been such a wonderful week with all of you. And we have had over 2,400 people have registered from over 50 countries to attend our events, both online and in person. And the fact that you want to spend your time with us at the Emily Dickinson Museum and 45 of our new favorite poets from around the country and abroad is truly the thing that we get up for in the morning. So thank you to all of you. Now tonight we have had an unexpected change to our program. I'm really sorry to say that Tyhimba Jess will not be able to be with us tonight due to an emergency, and our thoughts are with him. We really hope to be able to find a way to make this happen in the future, to bring Tyhimba to the museum and to all of you. So stay tuned for that. Fortunately, we have a really stellar lineup for you tonight. It was already an embarrassment of riches. And so in a little bit, we're going to enjoy a reading by headliner Sumita Chakraborty, who will be joining in a reading and conversation with Matt Donovan this evening. We are so excited about that. But before we move into the readings, we have a real treat for you. We are joined by acclaimed artist Lesley Dill and filmmaker Ed Robbins, who are here to give us a glimpse behind the making of an Emily Dickinson opera collaboration called Divide Light. The opera originated with creative director Lesley Dill in collaboration with composer Richard Marriott. It was captured in film by Ed Robbins in 2018, and the opera contemporizes the work of Emily Dickinson, linking the groundbreaking ideas of mid-19th century American transcendentalism to innovations and global concerns in today's rapidly changing world. So it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Lesley and Ed. Ed Robbins is a multi-award winning documentarian. Awards for his work include an Emmy, not too shabby, Ed, great job, Banff Awards, Best Doc, Rome Festival, BAFTA nominee, and others. He has worked as a writer-director on more than 100 films in America and beyond. His art-related film projects profiling musicians, artists at work, and performances have been shown in dozens of museums across the United States. And since 2011, he's also been an adjunct professor at Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. We are also joined by his beautiful wife, Lesley Dill, an American artist working at the intersection of language and fine art in printmaking, sculpture, installation, and performance, exploring the power of words to cloak and reveal the psyche. Her artistry transforms the emotions and the writings of Dickinson, Kafka, Rilke, among others, into works of paper, wire, horsehair, foil, bronze, and music, and works that awaken the viewer to the physical intimacy and the power of language itself. Lesley's artworks are in the collections of over 50 museums, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, we've heard of it, the Museum of Modern Art, New York, and the Whitney Museum of American Art, and she is the recipient of the Emily Dickinson Museum's 2019 Tell It Slant Award. Lesley and Ed, thank you both so much for being here.
That was great. Thank you, Brooke. So, welcome everyone. How did an opera come to be born? So, one day, not too long ago, I was in a residency in California with a composer friend, and the residency liked what we were doing performance-wise and musically. And they said, if you get a good idea, we will fund it. And we looked at each other and we thought, and we thought, let's do something with Emily Dickinson poetry. because I've used it in my artwork, my visual work for many, many years. And then we thought, well, what kind of musical form should it be? And we thought, should it be an oratorio or should it be a soloist? And I said, no, it's Emily Dickinson. Her words have got to be an opera. Her words alone are a huge story. I did not want to do an opera about her persona. As we know, there are many TV shows and films that are made about her persona, so I did not want to do that. I wanted to do an opera that was about her words, but somehow to make those words, to choose those words so that there is an emotional arc like you have in a movie. So we start softly. We start with vulnerability and fragility. I'm afraid to own a body. I'm afraid to own a soul. Then we go down deeper and deeper and darker, down to the nadir of the opera, which is loneliness, which I think is worse than death. The loneliness one dare not say, for in its grave to plumbing to ascertain its size. And then after the loneliness and darkness that included the darkness of the Civil War, we moved up the ladder into the thrill came slowly like a boon, ending with take all away from me, take all away from me, but leave me ecstasy. So the performer is in the red dress. That is the finale of the entire opera. And this image, I am so honored, is on the cover of the new Oxford University Press Oxford Handbook of Emily Dickinson. Thank you very much. Afterwards, we'll take questions. Now I give you the guy who said, oh, you know what, why don't I make a film of this?
So there was a national search for someone who could document and film this opera, and somehow, I don't know, her husband ended up doing it. How did that happen? So what you're about to see is a 15-minute excerpt from an hour, about a 90-minute opera that was done. There were two versions of the opera. One had a 40-person choir and about 6 lead singers in an operatic fashion. And when it was revived in New York, it was recomposed by the composer to fit 8 lead opera singers. So it had a different form. It was a big, giant venue in California, and in New York, it was in a theater, a small theater. And I wanted to capture the film, but I think what I would just want to point out a couple of things about the film before you watch the excerpts. I didn't want to just document the film. I wanted to somehow capture a bit of the experience of the visceral experience of being in the audience and seeing this film and creating its own piece rather than just a pure documentation of the film. So you'll see a certain layering happening a lot, and I kept pushing that. The other thing is the backgrounds. There were no sets. We decided to do animated backgrounds. In my ill-spent youth, I did some animation and directed some animations. So I went through this one period. Lesley was using a lot of photographs. So I drew from these hundreds of photographs that she had taken, these very strange photographs using Emily Dickinson's words, as she always incorporates text and image. And I created storyboards out of the ones I thought somehow resonated with a given theme or song. And through a collaborative evolution, we matched those, and I would storyboard them, meaning I would take one frame and then move it and move it and move it and think of ideas how to do it. And then we brought in these incredible SVA students who spent endless hours doing this amazing computerized things years ago before it was easy to do that, to make the text move and dance, and went far beyond my directing editorial kind of position. They were amazing contributions. So it was a collaboration on that end. So that's going on in the background, and it'll weave into the foreground during the film. Obviously, that didn't happen in the opera. So I hope you'll enjoy it. The words are all Emily Dickinson text, but not necessarily pure to any one given poem, as in her art.
Come along.
Thank you. Yeah, very short.
Each of you say a drop, or pellets of shake. I am richer than all my fellow men. And I am richer than all my fellow
Thank you so much, Lesley Dill, Ed Robbins. It is just remarkable to hear that music resonating in Dickinson's own garden here tonight. Thank you for bringing your stunning work to us. Really glad you're here. Lesley, I just was thinking of this thing that you wrote. All of the words that were and all the words that will be lie sleeping in our body, and one of the best ways for language, for words to enter into our bodies is through song. Thank you for that. We couldn't agree with you more. And that means it's time for some more words, time for some poetry. Let's see, we're going to have a chance to, by the way, to hear some more of that music after the readings when we are enjoying some wine and cheese. So we'll look forward to that too. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our readers tonight. Before I do, I want to just kindly ask if you would refrain from taking photos during this part of the evening. We'd really appreciate that. So we are going to hear from Matt and Sumita, who are going to read, and then they're going to be joined on stage by our wonderful festival friend and volunteer, Michael Mercurio, who will facilitate their conversation. Michael's a writer and a writing teacher and a convener who serves as Director of Community Engagement for Faraday Publishing Company, and we're very grateful to him for stepping into this role tonight. But first up, we're going to hear from Matt Donovan, who is the author of forthcoming book, The Dug Up Gun Museum, and it's coming out in November. But guess what? We have it here tonight. We have advanced copies. So we're going to sell them to you if you would like over at that table after the readings. And I know that you'll be delighted to get your hands on them. Donovan is also the author of a collection of lyric essays, A Cloud of Unusual Size and Shape, Meditations on Ruin and Redemption, which came out in 2016. He's the recipient of a Whitting Award, a Rome Prize in Literature, a Creative Capital Grant, and a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship in Literature, and he serves as director of the Boutel Day Poetry Center at Smith College. Then we will hear from Sumita Chakraborty, who is the author of the poetry collection Arrow, which came out in 2020, which has received coverage in the New York Times, NPR, and The Guardian. She is currently writing a scholarly book, Grave Dangers, Poetics, and the Ethics of Death in the Anthropocene, which is under advanced contract with the University of Minnesota Press. She is the recipient of a Ruth Lilly and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Fellowship from the Poetry Foundation, a Kundiman Fellow, and has been shortlisted for a Forward Prize for Best Single Poem by the Forward Arts Foundation in the UK. Recent editorial work includes curating the May 2021 selections for the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day series, as well as serving on the board of Alice James Books. And currently she's assistant professor of English and Creative Writing at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina. We're going to welcome Matt to the stage first. Thank you.
So much. Oh, thank you so much for being here, for coming out tonight. I am really honored to be here for so many reasons. I mean, this feels like hallowed ground to me. So I'm honored and humbled to be sharing poems with you tonight, and then just so honored to be a part of this festival, which has just been thriving. This is the 10th year, is that right? That's right, yeah, which is incredible, and it's such a literary highlight of the area. I really appreciate all you coming out tonight. It also, we were talking about this over dinner. I hope I never take it for granted again, this moment of coming together to hear poetry together live in any arena. But it is such an incredibly important thing to feel the community come together and experience poetry together. I want to thank everyone from the Dickinson Museum and the Tell It Slant Festival who helped organize this event. Jane, Nora, Elizabeth, Brooke, Anna, and Michael. It's, again, such an honor to be here and also to share the podium with Sumita. I haven't seen Sumita in a couple of years, and I'm really thrilled to be able to hear Sumita read in just a minute as well. So I'll be reading poems from, as you're hearing, from my new book, The Dug Up Gun Museum, which focuses on guns and gun violence in America. I see it as a kind of portrait of America through the lens of guns. It's the genesis of this book was, like so many of us, I was, filled with grief and rage at our ongoing epidemics of gun violence, but also really frustrated with our inability to contend with it for any kind of meaningful change or even meaningful language around it to come out. So part of my intention here was I traveled around the country. I went to different communities. I spent time with people. I wanted to have dialogue about guns. So I went to places like Cody, Wyoming, or Newtown, Connecticut, but also, cities like Chicago and Cleveland. And I just wanted to talk to people more about it. So a lot of the poems in here stem from those travels. And so here, I'm going to start a poem. This seemed appropriate. I have one poem in here that really rips off Emily Dickinson. So it seemed appropriate to start with that one. And I think you'll recognize the riff here. I traveled to Chicago and met all kinds of incredible people there. One of them is a Chicago artist by the name of Garland Martin Taylor. And I was meeting with him to talk to him about his sculpture that's described in this poem. But so I won't describe the sculpture now, but except to say that he also, coming from Chicago, was, just deeply concerned about the normalizing of gun violence. And so one of the things he did was decide to take his gun sculpture on the road. So we had sort of similar impulses there. I didn't at all ever think that Dickinson would show up in this poem. And I was really struck in thinking about reading it tonight that just the ways in which she saturates the imagination in American culture and is always one step ahead of you. The title of this poem spills directly into the body of the piece. Here, the thing with feathers isn't hope, but a 400-pound pistol in the bed of a pickup, welded together from scrapyard metal and stamped with names of kids shot and killed near the artist's home. Except for all the feathers, dyed cotton candy blue and affixed to the pistol's cylinder and grip, wrapping the length of the barrel with a flourish, like a boa entwining a neck. It might seem like any other oversized gun. Conversation piece, he called it. Although the feathers came later, only after he'd begun driving south with a plan to haul the sculpture from Chicago to Atlanta, then back through Charleston and Sandy Hook. But when he stopped for gas the first time, he knew his art had failed when a man sprinted across the parking lot to say, "God damn, that's one badass gun." Something needed to change. Maybe feathers could turn the pistol into a thing you approached with a question instead of praise. And if the plumes now covered some of the names, burying the elegies hammered into metal, what choice did he have but to continue driving through town after town, listening to the wind song whipping across the wide mouth of the barrel, tending to the gun now and then from a sack of feathers he kept in the back seat to use whenever storms lashed things loose. One of the places, for better or for worse, I visited was NRA headquarters. And yeah, maybe an exercise in futility, feeling impotence as, as a response to the kind of grief and rage that wells up in one. I drove there. I left a AWP conference and rented a little car and drove out to, when I was in DC, and drove out to NRA headquarters in Virginia. Not sure at all what I would do there. Reason with them? I did not. And then the focus of this poem is actually, I don't know if you know this or not, but there is a National Firearms Museum that's attached to NRA headquarters, which is where this poem it focuses on. The title of the piece references a form of engraving. There's all these sort of elaborately engraved guns there, and so it's a kind of like pointillist style of engraving. It's called Thousands or Millions of Tiny Dots of Varying Size. Once I drove through Virginia slush to NRA headquarters, the winter air humming with the emptiness of my plan, which was not much more than the hope of doing something beyond thoughts or prayers or any one word I might try to use after seeing a self-defense catalog with its photo of a young girl sitting cross-legged against the cinder block grid of a school wall as she grips a bulletproof backpack, raising it up so that it conceals her body more or less behind a kid-friendly style, which means blue with a cascade of emojis. For the last mile, I stared at strip mall signs. Jenny Craig, elegant dancing, lead by example taekwondo, that made me feel as if I was lost in someone's idea of what America should be. Eye-catching, with plenty of parking, and a flailing inflatable tube man who rises and falls, arms raised, frantic to explain that a memory foam mattress sells for less guaranteed. Without an appointment or idea of what to do next, I sidestepped the lobby's Tom Selleck cutout, telling me something about freedom I forgot to write down, and strolled into the first room of the National Firearms Museum, carrying some vague hope of what? Whatever I'd come here to find. It wasn't Annie Oakley's pistol or a custom 12-gauge commemorating Princess Di's wedding, or the gold inlaid half-dozen geese soaring between trigger and bolt of a shotgun belonging to Herman Goring. A few lines of wall text described Bellino style, which meant I learned the process of utilizing thousands or millions of tiny dots of varying size to create subtly shaded scenes, which ranged from two coonhounds charging quail sheltered in long tangles of grass, to a rifle's photorealistic Rolls Royce careening toward a woman, topless, lips parted, nestled against a tiger. And peering into one mounted magnifying glass, I saw a gun engraved with a tribute to Picasso, featuring, I swear, a miniature Guernica that mimicked each detail of his horse and bull, the one jagged light, and those bodies we've seen so many times, necks craned back, each mouth in a whale, rendered in a way that reduced any trace of sorrow to mere line and shape. America, I'm done with prayers and mirrored vitrines, the yellow dots of emojis wide-eyed on a kid's armored backpack, and black dots too numerous to count, spread across those maps that track gun violence. And for what? Then again, here I am speaking to you within the silence of a poem, which is not much more than a form of prayer we've heard too many times that makes nothing change. By the time I'd finished wandering through the other rooms, it was too late to do anything but drive the same roads back to the hotel while half listening to classic rock and chasing after an idea about how we should step back and see the shape made by those black dots scattered across the US map. Although haven't we done that already? Stepped back and looked and long known what we've made? In honor of Emily Dickinson, I will read the one short poem I have in my book. So this references, a lot of you probably know this line, but W.B. Yeats, he has a famous sort of mantra about a poem that it should come together like a clicking of a box. This is a poem that references that right there in the title. Again, the title spills into the body of the poem. In traveling around the country, you know, I went to places like Machine Gun Vegas, and you spend time in gift shops, like in places like Machine Gun Vegas. And, you know, well, I guess I'll just, I thought for a while of having a list poem that described everything I'd come across in these kind of gift shops around America. And then I thought, you get the picture with just maybe the two things that are referenced here. Yeats claimed a poem should come together with a click, like a box shutting its lid. Yet given what's for sale in the Battlefield Vegas gift shop, would it be better to choose the shotgun shells glued together to form a cross? Or that pink hoodie with the word love spelled out using a Glock, a hand grenade, a switchblade, and the long, dark shape of an AR-15 in order to suggest something closing. I'll read just one last poem. This is a piece, you don't need to know too much in here. You need to know, I grew up in the Akron, Cleveland area. You need to know that Cleveland sports teams always lose, but you probably already knew that. This is it's a piece that references Dylan Thomas's famous poem, Fern Hill, his great piece of nostalgia and the fall from innocence. Yeah, when I was writing the book, I wasn't thinking about it, how there's a kind of subplot of poets who are appearing, and here you just heard Dickinson and Yeats, and now Dylan Thomas, and I think I was interested in the poetry's relationship to violence, what it can afford as solace and response to violence, and maybe what language it can afford in terms of interrogating violence. Thank you all again so much for coming. It's really an honor to be here. Green means literally 1,000 things or more. So concludes an essay on Fern Hill, in which the student seems somewhere between jazzed up and pissed off that green might mean so many things from one stanza to the next. Here, a blooming Eden proxy. Here, rot made by the grip of time, for starters. Or that sun-slaked field not far from our classroom, as lush green as any Welsh farmyard, grayed overnight with frost. Emerald beer bottle hurled from a car. The slack-jawed lime green goblin face spanning a front porch post-Halloween for so many weeks it looks like it's here to stay. The long ago brown green of Cleveland, where it rained always and without pity, upon a past I craved despite myself, and our team lost always 14-2. Yeah, you laugh. You don't know what it was like. It's what it's still like. Every time we waited in the bleachers for the game to resume, my father would look down upon the outfield's mowed lines and proclaim, "Still a lot of green out there," meaning anything can happen and will. Have you ever heard in a crowd the saddest part of "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," where everyone lies and pretends we don't care if we ever get back, and makes the last word echo twice more? We always want to get back, whether or not we're hailing childhood green. Like the student in her essay, I too could keep rattling off images of spring and decay, June sunset horizon flash, summer hair stained olive from churning over chlorinated pools, green shadow of a hand that makes it feel, as it says in the poem, as if owls were bearing everything away. Instead of looking again at the image online I glimpsed before returning to my still ungraded hay-high stack of student work. Maybe you saw it too. Maybe you also had the spellbound luck of wandering to other tasks instead of asking what it means to know anything can happen in a wholly different way, instead of looking once more at the slash of police tape that is the only horizon that matters just now for the two men in the photograph who sit together on the curb, faces glowing blue-red in the lights, both of them bleary-eyed but alive, swaddled in aftermath in a blanket that is green, a detail that couldn't matter less, given how the numbers of the dead still rise. Here we are again, as inevitable as the clocks tick, looking in at a place that now will never be young again. Is there a way to say it? There's been a shooting that will allow it to be heard, remembered and heard without the easy glide of our past tense, that will stop us from wanting to turn to anything under the wide starry sky that is not the green fire burning in the minds of those men, or the green of a blanket America provides and provides without change. Thank you very much.
That was so great. I wish we could hear more of that. You want to trade? Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. Can folks in the back hear me? Awesome. I'm going to set a timer because tonight I saw a former student of mine who's apparently not sick of me yet, and she's here in the audience. And I thought that it was still summer somehow because I thought she was currently traveling. And I thought that her brilliant chapbook that comes out in February was about to come out very, very soon, which tells me I have no sense of time whatsoever. So I'm going to set a timer tonight. There it goes. Without further ado, thank you so much to all of you for coming, to Michael, to Brooke, to Anna, to Jane, to Nora, to Elizabeth, to Lesley and Ed, and of course the incomparable Matt. And I do want to also take a second to collectively send warmest and healing wishes to Ty Himba. I'm sure so many of you are huge fans. I myself am a huge fan. I'm quite tempted, if you're not a huge fan, to not read from my work and instead tell you why you should be a huge fan for about the next 30 straight minutes. I so wish he could have joined us, and I hope he will be able to soon at another date. I'm going to take a sip first, and soon you'll understand why. So for the most part, I'm going to read from my first collection of poems, which is called Arrow and came out in late 2020, which was a much cooler sounding year when I signed the contract 2 years prior than it actually turned out to be for bringing out a book or just about anything. I'm going to read a couple poems from this book and then a few newer poems after that. I'm going to start with the first poem in the collection, which is called Marigolds, and there are a few things I need to tell you ahead of time. One is that it's a long poem, so my apologies and thank you. The other is that you're going to hear a few lines in here that are from Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus. They're usually the ones that sound a little bit more Shakespeare-y than I tend to. And that also connects to the kind of point of the entire book. The book is largely about the aftermath of domestic violence and other forms of violence that I and other loved ones have experienced. And in lieu of telling the story of what happened, I was interested in telling the story of what happened next for the most part. And this collection accordingly starts out with its speaker, who, yes, is me. I'm telling it slant like I'm supposed to. The speaker's in a really kind of irate mood, not a very nice mood at all. It finds me / her at pretty much the first moment where she's willing to take up space in the world, and that did not look particularly kind or generous. So the story that the book generally tells is of growing into accepting love and tenderness and care, which for me was one of the main arcs that I was interested in talking about here. So this is the first poem in the book, so it does not come toward the end or even the middle of that arc. I'm going to share with you a few poems over the course of that story. And Titus Andronicus is Shakespeare's bloodiest, most juvenile play, which is what pretty much made it handy for me here for this poem. You're also going to hear some allusions to events that were current at the time of my writing the poem, especially the last few weeks. Most notably, I don't know if any of you remember the disappearance of a Malaysian Air flight. I was pretty obsessed with it at the time, and it kind of haunts this poem as well. A lot of astronomical factoids because I'm a space nerd. And finally, you're going to hear a number of names of people. Those are the first names of various poets, and I very sheepishly must admit that Emily is not one of them that you'll hear. But again, it does tell it slant, so maybe that counts. Before you get mad at me, I will start reading. The poem is called Marigolds. When I picture Robert, he is in the public garden watching setting suns like the ill-fated king turn all to gold. Robert with the swans, Robert under the statue of Washington, Robert amid the tulips. Without a childhood home, I made for myself a house of orchids, of sewer grates with fishes on them, of forsythia and maple trees. Of this I am sure. When Robert crossed the bridge between Boston and Cambridge, he saw Poseidon. In late summer, he could tell that underneath the sailboats is a god, mighty and to be feared. In midwinter, he alone knew the ice could not long contain that god. In the pipes in his home, he heard the gurgle of illness. I smell illness in the riotous orchid blooms. What are midnight trees? I think that once I knew one such tree, if it is the kind owls gather on nightly to fight, barking, eyes dim with bloodlust and the hiss of feathers, I built for myself a house of orchids with a cave underneath, a cave shaped into an armory brimming with tarantula hawks, giant sparrow bees, and admiral butterflies. In place of stalactites hang treeless, inextricable roots. Oh, sacred receptacle of my joys. The day I first learned the word Argonaut, I wrote it in a poem. I searched the seas for one. I searched the skies. I searched a painting. In the painting, I found the word spears, which I drove slowly into my father's ribs. He I eulogized and he I resurrected, reaching again for the spears. I have seen countless full moons fail. Each of them hollowed, flooding heart first, the craw-faced light, the bracken underneath, then the sound of a wounded owl and a soft, sudden darkness in my throat. Oh, how this villainy. In morning, the owls are replaced by hawks. From one angle, broad-winged hawks seem to have two pairs of hollow eyes. We are looking for you, say the kettles of satellites to the humans lost, to the plane disappeared, to what lives 30 miles below the surface of Enceladus. On this morning in April, Hikesun 01, Ocean Shield, and HMS Echo hear a thump that sounds like the colors inside an oyster shell. The frequency of the noise can make a heart stop. Anxious as seaweed over the sides of the ship creep hordes of trembling locators. The satellites stare with breath hitching in their throats. Between the wine-colored hull of Ocean Shield and Enceladus lies 8 times the distance between Earth and Sun, and 30 miles below the surface of that geyser-ridden, tiger-striped Saturnian moon lies life, report the satellites. The hawks steal their 2 pairs of eyes up toward alien oceans on other planets. What I am is all that I can carry, wrote Deborah. What can I carry? All that I caught, I left behind. All that I missed, I carried. The hawks are not looking toward alien oceans. I am. I am looking too to alien men and women. I picture hurtling into them by turn to serve my lust. I picture us bent sideways, impaled, contorted, and screaming. I picture the different shades of a moan. The word bed fills the 4 eyes in my mind with the color gold. Gold of the ill-fated king and the garden sunset. Gold glinting in a decaying tooth. Goldenrod, a haze of pollen, the dragon's treasure. A long necklace of many fine gold chains reaching down to a woman's hips. Young woman walks down to the river of gold. Young woman walks down to the river and drowns. In the word bed also joyously wailed bed, the color of ashen near death. Bed, the fleshly color of bodies broken for good. Bed, the color blue of heart-stopped lips. So here I lift this one hand up to heaven. The ghosts of the poisoned dogs live in the piano. The ghost of my mother, still living, lives in her egg-sized tumor and staghorn kidney stone. The ghost of my ability to love without grief, still living, lives in this poem. All my pockets filled with stones, in the river I'll be found. Why then I am the devil's dam. Dangle me from a cliff 12,000 feet above sea. Oh, speak with possibilities. Build me a skin of glass to cover the Grand Canyon. Throw me on it. Summon 1,000 wilding mares. Restrain them with massive chains, foot-long links of hardened steel. When the chains buck from fracture, let the mares stampede the glass. Bid them trample my body. Watch from a great distance as the glass cracks. Watch us beasts entangle. Watch me take a hoof to the mouth, to the skull, to the groin. Hear us squeal and bark and howl, calling out as wretches do to failing life. And when at last we 1,001 blood-filled creatures reach the bottom of the canyon, throw yourself in. My voice in your ear will tell you that you were meant to die like this, a beautiful and inelegant dive onto a field of red, some bright and sun-kissed, some dark and pulp-dashed, your and our blood across the burnt orange schist. See, oh, see what I have done. I fear neither the sight of nor the word for blood. HMAS Albatross has joined the search for the plane. It is May now and there is no sign of it. The detritus lied. The home I made is of orchids, forsythia, barbed wire, and burnt metal. In the bedroom, I planted what I imagine a midnight tree to be. Its roots join the treeless roots in the armory beneath. Ravished, my hands cut off, my tongue cut out, I put my home under the wisteria, craving owls at war under thick purple overhang. No territory there is that is not mine. The albatross, it is mine. Enceladus is mine. Your innermost thigh beneath the wisteria, mine. Poseidon is mine. And the river between Boston and Cambridge and the one that wends through Georgia floods into the Gulf. I am dreaming of a monument to moments colonized by theaters of the imagination. Oh, monstrous. The O of a mouth without a tongue, the O of 2 pairs of lips clasped, starving on one another, horns and cry of hounds. The ballet in my deadly standing eye is the arrow's flight into the neck, the horse's tumble into the canyon, a nation's search for a single tiger with quills in its neck, a spilled cloud of felled bees, the elephant's horror in the flock of red-billed birds, feathered locusts who from their first breath form trembling caverns with their mouths, their aggregate force snapping branches off of trees. The orchestra plays low drum beats, a single singer carving the melody. Do not, I pray, promise me an untroubled lake. Take me instead to the rivers with vengeful gods under steaming and frozen waters. Take me instead for the stag, the rifle, and the hunter. Promise me unending days in which I can picture, then picture again a fire whirl, the slowness of the sea drinking a ferry or a plane, the gasps of air bubbles around carapaces, the moons of Saturn. I myself am hell's, and I prize them as if they were the rarest blooms. Promise me I will always reach again for spears, await the horses on the glass above the gaping hollow O of the earth. All is lost, flee this house. So chants James's Ouija, or perhaps in the palace of time, our lives are a circular stair, and I am turning, writes Lucille's ghost-guided hand. Always in my mouth I hold the head of an axe with its bit at the back of my throat. Oh heavens, can you hear a man groan? Here nothing breathes but we phased and hungry. Oh wondrous thing. Worlds such as this were not thought possible to exist, writes the astronomer. It is June. Deep beneath those golden waves of the river I'll be found. My sister has joined the list of those I mourn. Her ghost lives in each powder-winged moth. In the ballet, the stage fills with a troupe of dancers in dusty gold skirts, shoes asphyxiation blue, hair the tones of flesh. Center stage are 6 dancers who wear only red, moving in unison so they throb as one bloodied yoke. The troupe around them shudders as though in blissful death throes. The single singer quiets. The orchestra breaks down its instruments. For my brethren slain, I ask a sacrifice, O barbarous, beastly villains like myself. Die. Die saying, please, die longing, die helpless, die with your eyes fixed to the most treacherous side of a mountain, to newborn stars, to plains not found. Die with your throat stuffed so that each moment hereafter is a dream of a gasp. Die so that my midnight tree might grow new branches. Die like a sapling struck by lightning in an ash-ridden and still smoldering field. Die amid the tulips. Die smelling the orchids I grow. Die in the mass of horses and a pied flock of shrieking birds. From the oceans, creatures great and small take to the land. From the land, each parachuted seed takes to the sky. From within my armory comes a scent melodious and unearthly, a strain of moths, black, flies as though sewn each to each at the wing. Their flight path blooms dark into the gray air like a print from a silvered glass plate. Soon we will learn our bodies are formed of dead stars, so that if we made incisions from breastbone to rectum, the caves within would reveal themselves to house celestial ash. As the stag, I fear the mouth of the rifle. As the rifle, I point my mouth deadly toward you. As the hunter, I execute myself so I may feast. Worlds such as this were not thought possible to exist. My lord, I aim a mile beyond the honeyed moon. I promised you 2 things, that the speaker was in a very bad mood and that you'd understand why I brought my water up. As I mentioned before, one of the main stories that I'm trying to tell in this particular book is of coming into learning to accept and even love things like love and tenderness and kindness. Those didn't always come naturally, easily, readily, or at all to me. So I'm going to read a few poems that kind of give you a sense of how that journey goes. And then I'm going to close with a few poems from a new series that I'm writing. This poem is called Oh Spirit. There are a few poems titled that in the collection, and they're usually kind of barometer poems. They kind of test the temperature of exactly where that particular journey is at that particular point. A bear brings forth her young, informous and unshapen. I now wear the pelt of the conjured beast around my groin. I think of new words for solace, one of which is knifed. We take no form until licked into shape by the tongues of those who love us. I had to do a short one for Emily too. She would be mad at me for that first thing I did. One of the things that was interesting to me in thinking about how the speaker comes to embrace ideas of community and care has to do with the problem of scale. For much of the book, when the speaker is trying to acknowledge her biggest griefs and her own biggest tragedies, she is pretty much the center, as you may have guessed from Marigold's, of her frame of reference and point of view. And then as the book kind of goes on, there are a few moments essentially where other speakers and other personae call her out on that. So this is one example of that. It's a persona poem. It's one of two title poems in the book, and it's a persona poem in the voice of Nyx, the Titan of Night. At several other points in the book, when my speaker is particularly fraught with grief of some kind, she calls out to and stages an imaginary conversation with Nyx, or imagines what Nyx is up to and how much Nyx cares about her personal grief. And in this poem, toward the end of the book, Nyx answers that she does not care very much at all about any one particular mortal. The epigraph to this, again, one of two title poems in the collection, is a line that's now going to be familiar to you. Worlds such as this were not thought possible to exist. It's from scientists from NASA upon the discovery of a planet that was huge, kind of like Earth-ish, except 17 times bigger. Terrifying. Arrow, in the voice of Nyx. Was it I who invaded the day, or the day who invaded me? I do, I undo, I redo. I enlarged the figure till it was a mountain. I don't fear the sublime, and I cut off its head, having already cut out its tongue. I have 3 siblings and flocks of children, and though we're oft confused, you must know that I differ from all. I am not my brother darkness, nor my sister dirt, nor my brother torment. I am a time, and I am an astronomy, a geometry I invented myself, an architecture, a divine, and like any divine, yes, I have made kin from unions with my kin. Out of a union with my brother, I made the nymphs, the river, and the boatsmen lullabies. If X is an obstruction, and if the poetry of X was music, then this poem is a musical obstruction. And if this poem is a musical obstruction, then this poem is a lullaby. My kin born of my kin, I am a space as much as I am a voice. Did you truly hail me for a dim-witted conversation about love? Me? There is nothing like me. I am no more like my siblings or my parents than I am like a placid lake or the gaping from which I was born. I am a charioteer, a bird. Would you believe me if I said I also made the ether and the day? Whether or not your faith is stored in my ear, I am sure in what I have made. How could I be both gentle enough and dangerous enough for your thoughts? Do you have thoughts? I asked about moon, dark, pain. You only gave me yourself. And as to my other question, it was me. I invaded the day. It didn't stand a chance. I really like yelling at myself. Oh, thanks. This is the final poem in the book, and then I'm going to read, let me check. Yeah, okay. The final poem in Arrow, and then I'm going to read some new ones from a new series. This poem is called O. Stars are not the end, but the beginning. A bird is to its throat as a promise is to its sharp edge. I wanted to make for you a sun shower. Instead, I have made for you a mortal thing. Writing is knowing how to cut. There is a space in my body that did not exist when I began this book. It is a window. When I next speak, I will do so through that window. Please leave the window unlatched. When I next speak, it will be with changed lips. I wonder what their color will be. Finally, she enlarges the figure to a grand scale and cuts off its head. So I'm going to read just 3 poems from a new series called The B-Sides of the Golden Records, which features a little bit more space nerdery from me. So for those of you who may not know, the Golden Records were phonograph records that were sent up on the 1977 Voyager space mission. Jimmy Carter at the time was president, and NASA put together a group of scientists, artists, etc., to figure out what to share with any extraterrestrials that the spacecraft might encounter, to kind of introduce them to all of Earth and to Homo sapiens. There were obviously some things they left out about both of those things for a variety of reasons. One was, of course, the committee was entirely made of largely blue blood white folks, mostly men. It was also hampered by various other restrictions at the time, including copyright restrictions, concerns about pornographic or explicit sexual material, concerns about portraying humans in a bad light. So obviously it left out pretty much most of it. Thus, the B-sides of the Golden Records. And I'm going to read 3 of these to you. The first 2 are depressing, and the last one is depressing, but ends slightly less so. And that will be my last poem. And I can't wait to talk to you all and talk to Michael and Matt. This has been great fun. Thank you for having me. The B-sides of the Golden Records, track 3, Some Flowers That Have Died. I told you who I am. If you need flowers that have not died, we're in a lovely garden. The cry violet, or the Viola crayana, its purple blooms drew the fingers of lovers and of botanists. It grew in the kinds of rocks we have that are made of skeletons of marine organisms, like mollusks, which are small, tender mussels housed in curved shells. We said we needed the rocks for our own homes. They died. The unnamed flowers in the Rolling Stones song Dead Flowers, they grew from the sadness and grief of the singers. They spilled out of Mick Jagger's and Keith Richards' mailboxes every morning. They were born singed and curled. They died before the guitars were first plucked. The daisies, or the Bellis perennis that sheath Bridget Bardot's chest in plucking the daisy, they began to die when they were first cut, kept dying as the costume designer sewed them into a bralette, and starved while touching her nipples and the cleft between her breasts. In dying, they taught me about some of my hungers. The Maui Huau Kahiwi, or Hibiscadelphus wilderianus, of the family of mallows. The murderers came to the island on ships launched from colder seas. Soon, little was left of the lava or the rocks the lava cools into, and nothing was left of the flowers. In the future, there will be a way to conjure the ghost of these flowers' smells. Aside from going to the lab where the scientists create the scents of some dead flowers, or the installations the artists made with the scientists so that many can stand together and feel time and space blossoming, there are other things we can do. For example, we can imagine. We look at photographs like tree with daffodils and flying insect with flowers, which we're sending to you, and watercolor within and outside of their lines to see them in another color with another shape of petal or an extra stamen. We can dream ourselves into the most plentiful rocks and soils. The trouble is, the human imagination, we've learned, can kill more easily than it can resurrect. Side note, one really interesting thing about writing this series is it makes me use a royal we that's a conglomerate that I don't like. It's been something. The B-sides of the Golden Records, track 8, Alienation of Affection. When cleaved of their fur, rabbits look like they do not come from our planet. Perhaps they came from yours. Perhaps years ago, some of you came here and left on our land these creatures, muscle and fat, smooth around lungs, the size of thumbs, and the other vital parts, eyes protruding from a face like an emaciated cat. Or perhaps you sent them on a spacecraft alone, as we are doing with these records, and it is sheer luck that they landed safely here. The story goes the same way in either case. What happens next is that you left. The mystery about them is the same as the mystery about all of us. Where did they find their first pelts, and how did they learn to attach them to surfaces that were so raw, so smooth, and had so little to cling to? This will be my last poem. I look forward to talking with all of you. Thanks for having me. This has been great fun. The B-sides of the Golden Records, track 1, The Canary Flies Toward the Mine. And yes, it's the one that ends up kind of happy. Once there was a patch of moss on a fallen tree trunk. We ran our hands through it. We sat on it. When we did so, we crushed the spores, we crushed insects. Once, whenever we saw an insect, we'd swat it or smush it in a wad of toilet paper. How to trap and kill an insect can sometimes be an entire plot point in our romantic comedies. We sometimes make lovely romantic comedies. Once we made crackers and cookies in all kinds of shapes, elephants, lions, circles, stars. We have trouble believing anything is real unless we can swallow it. More than once, we have poisoned the water. We are so very afraid that you will think we are trying to hurt you. We are so very sorry we could not send you. Here comes the sun. It was written in a garden where there were purple and yellow flowers and a windmill and moss. What we need is for you to listen to our arias, our ragas, and our syncopations, and to think that we are worthy of saving, or at least deserving of a gentle vigil. We would also like if you could look at our demonstrations of licking, eating, and drinking and tell us how we work. Once we touched our unwashed hands to one another's lips. Once we took pictures of the insides of our bodies. Once we tapped messages to each other in languages we invented for when only silence and percussion would do, and we heard our tools scrape against one another, and a wild dog bleated somewhere far away. We walked, our hearts beat, we laughed. Thank you so much. Hi again.
I admit I was not prepared to sit in the middle, but hi, everyone. My name's Michael Mercurio, and it is my great pleasure to engage both of these brilliant poetic minds in conversation tonight. I have a few pre-prepared questions, but Matt and Sumita, if you guys start riffing on something and decide you don't need me, I'll just sit here and smile. So I do want to thank both of you for being here and for reading and for sharing your incredible work. Definitely buy Arrow. It is a book that I have loved and returned to a number of times, and I'm very happy that I was able to buy Matt's book tonight, which I've been waiting for since I first found out about it. So since we're all gathered, both physically and many of you out there in the world virtually, in Emily Dickinson's beloved garden, we're in view of the conservatory, which is somewhere over my left shoulder. Sumita, you would have to turn around to see it, but it's out there, I promise. The conservatory is where Emily tended her plants through the cold seasons of the year. And I'd like to start by asking both of you to reflect a bit on the ways you've tended your poems through your own cold seasons. When did you start writing them? Who helped you learn how to shape them? And this is very important for all poets. How do you approach the inevitability of rejection?
Sure, yeah, this is on. Yes, yes, it sounds like it is. Okay. Okay. When did I first start writing them? You all may have gotten a tiny sense, I don't know from where it would be, but that I didn't have the best childhood. So I actually didn't really pay attention to anything school related or written down, poetry very much included, until about partway through college, where I wasn't good at writing poems or writing about poems, but I really enjoyed being confused in the way that they confused me. So I owe a world of gratitude to my undergraduate professors for doing much of what you just asked about, as well as other teachers I've had along the way. And then, yeah, I think boatloads of reading, good friends who keep me honest, and vice versa. I learn a lot from students. Students ask you questions about things that you have long taken for granted. So they give you an opportunity to never get to do that, which I think is really, really important, to be able to see things anew and not kind of rest easy in your habituated patterns. As for how to deal with rejection, I think a lot of people will tell you to grow a thicker skin, et cetera, et cetera. I have skin that's about the consistency of rice paper. It's never going to get thicker. So essentially, I recommend something a little bit closer to self-care, at least in the original mode before it became a buzzword, the original mode through Black feminist thought, where self-care is about, if you have something important to say and important to do, recognizing that often there will be forces that don't let you do that. And not to say all rejections are like this, it just happens, but still, there will often be forces that don't let you do that. And one of your biggest responsibilities is to care for yourself through trying to do what you believe is really important on earth. And figuring out how to be kind to yourself through those moments, or at least I try to figure out how to be kind to myself during those moments and indulge the fact that it hurts, rather than force myself to kind of slough it off and then get up and do it the next day, knowing that it'll probably hurt again at some point. I'm being really cheerful tonight. Hi, everyone.
It's okay, you're being who you are.
It's so true. So that's all I've got, I think.
The question was how we first came to poetry, or how we get through the fallow periods.
When did you start writing poems? Who helped you learn how to shape them? And how do you approach the inevitability of rejection?
Got it. I mean, I grew up. I grew up like I think a lot of poets, just intuitively excited about the musicality of language, like the sheer sounds of words excited me. I read a lot, and then I really love what Sumita was saying about dwelling in confusion and the plurality of meaning. That's what really excited me, that we could all be sitting around and have a dialogue about the possibility of meaning, but also be very comfortable with ambiguity, and that that you would return to the piece and see something new in it, every time you came back. And so that really resonated with me. And yeah, so many folks, I've been thinking a lot about just who have helped me through my fallow periods, which are many, and sometimes daily, sometimes many times a day. Living in this area has been really exhilarating for me. I just moved here 2018, so this is the start of my 5th year here. But it's being in this community of writers has just been so exhilarating for me. I teach at Smith. I work with the incredible Smithies over there, and being in the presence of so many incredible writers with festivals like this and readings like this has meant a lot to me and my work. It's been utterly instrumental in the development of my work. And I don't know where I would be without that. And there's so many teachers along the way who I'm so indebted to. And then rejection. It's just part of the game. I don't mean to be glib about it, because there are times where it definitely stings and it's easy to get caught up in that. I strike out all the time when I'm submitting work. There's just a conversation
on Twitter. I was talking about this yesterday. I'm not on Twitter, but this is secondhand Twitter, which is the best kind of Twitter. Someone was saying, I'm not like Jericho Brown. I don't, I get rejected all the time. And Jericho tweeted back, I was like, I get rejected all the time. Like this, it is part of the game of writing. And I try not to take it personally. And then the writer John Murillo, I've been really delving into his work and hearing his words of wisdom. And every time I feel like he talks in conversations, he talks about the importance of just getting back to what poetry is about and not getting caught up in the pettiness of po-biz, which is the worst word in the English language, I've decided. It's not moist, don't believe it. It is po-biz, that idea of the business of poetry. And remembering, that what it's about, and using language as a tool to interrogate the world and engage with the self and emotions and experience. And it's not about whether or not you ever got into plowshares, which I have never gotten into plowshares.
Neither have I.
I haven't submitted.
So we know Emily Dickinson was a little bit of a homebody, but as one of her poems notes, there is no frigate like a book to take us lands away, nor any coursers like a page of prancing poetry. Both of you have written poems that employ journeys as a conceit. Matt, Here the Thing with Feathers Isn't Hope, certainly has a journey at the core of it. And Sumita, your stunning B-side of the Golden Record poems are really involving a journey through time and space. These poems move on multiple levels at the same time, with the literal travel described or alluded to in the poems, and the figurative level where the travel becomes something more than just point A to point B, taking on an elevated meaning in which the reader can understand or identify the complexity of existence. When you're writing poems like these, how do you achieve these layers of meaning? Do you start with the literal and then tease out the figurative through revisions? Or do you start with the figurative ideal and work until you're able to adhere it to something concrete? Or is there some other way that you've discovered that I haven't?
I can go first again. I feel like I'm hogging this.
No, not at all. I'm just deferring to you. So if you feel free to
right.
just make me do it at once.
First,
But yeah.
I'll go with it now. I'll make you do it next
Okay,
time.
all right.
Okay, good. I think that's a really interesting question. And actually, I realized I didn't answer your question about what I do when things go fallow, which is handy because that's sort of kind of a way of getting at this one. For me, the figurative and the literal are really kind of a chicken and egg or a snake eating itself, depending on whether you feel whimsical or grim. I think that it's hard for me to contemplate one without the other. And in terms of which came first, it's often really hard for me to even tell because I think that when I think about figures and metaphors, they tend to feel quite tactile or textured. Or sonic or something else that also feels very real and sensory. And similarly, when I think about the quote unquote real, I'm also often thinking about how there are 5 million different little unspoken myths and assumptions that we all make about things in our real world that we all just accept conjointly, right? And that's essentially what constitutes reality. So that feels in so many ways as figurative to me as the most fanciful metaphor. So those two really go hand in hand. I think that in terms of layering them, that goes back to the fallow period question that I didn't answer at the time. I am shockingly, brutally practical about poetry. I'm not a muse kind of person. I'm a work kind of person. And it's just, I don't think any special muses would have talked to me if they could, because why? They're doing muse stuff. They're hanging out with other muses. So what I'm usually doing is I'm reading a lot, if I'm not writing a lot, and writing a lot and reading a lot, as much as I possibly can. And eventually I have found that things kind of constellate together. If you keep chasing down the things that you're interested in, if you let yourself follow kind of unruly, surprising obsessions, you don't tell yourself necessarily what you must look at and only tell yourself you must look at more and more and more things. I have found that you make little links and little connections between things that surprise even you, which is where the fun really starts happening. And that's for me how they all kind of end up coming together, whether figurative or literal. It just comes out of making myself look at stuff.
That's really great. That's a beautiful answer to that question.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is, yeah, the muses, they can't be bothered. They have lyres to strum, and yeah, they're not coming around. And so just that hard work of interrogation, I feel like the one thing that I have learned is to trust my intuition when I'm when an associative leap or subject matter or sort of disparate thought occurs to me, and to try and chase after what that link is becomes part of the work of what I'm trying to do. It doesn't mean I always get there, and it doesn't mean that I don't have false starts. And I feel like I have I don't know if you have this, Sumita, but I feel like I have a few things that I feel like it should become a poem, or I feel like it should belong in this poem, and it's like this, I don't know, like toxic cloud that just floats from poem to poem and ruins them for a while until it has to go away into this folder of toxic clouds.
Then it'll ruin another one later.
Yeah, exactly. But I can't help but come back to it. So I mean, maybe one day it'll reveal itself to me. But I like just chasing after whatever that intuitive impulse is. That becomes part of the work. I feel like I didn't answer something in there, but I totally trust.
No, I'm
okay.
happy to accept that answer. I'll give you a point for that.
Okay, but Sumita gets 6 points for that last.
Sumita gets 6 points
now
for.
we're competing. Yeah. This is going to be good.
Matt, I am going to give you a chance to answer this first. Yes.
I was supposed to make him.
Oh, I'm going to give Sumita a chance to make you answer this first.
All right.
I have another question.
You answer it first.
I'm going to do it.
Thank you. So the French have a term, terroir, which, you'd never know I took 7 years of French by the way I pronounce it. But it is the concept that an environmental system, a biome, has an influence on the way that wine ends up tasting. And I have decided to abuse that term and bring it into the world of poetry, because poets are also shaped by environmental systems and biomes. And I know that both of you have lived in different parts of the country throughout the years, and there are direct and indirect hints in your work of your time spent there. Would you speak a little bit to how these environmental factors have shaped your work?
Sumita, do you want to? No.
Do it.
Sure. Yeah, is this on still? Yep. It's interesting you asked that question. I've actually, as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in Ohio, and I've been, when I was growing up in Ohio, I was very anxious to leave Ohio. But I've been thinking a lot recently about what it means to be a writer from the Midwest, or a writer from Ohio for that matter. And there are writers like Hart Crane or James Wright, who meant a lot to me, probably even before I read anything by them, but just by virtue of the fact that they were literary figures that had somehow started in Ohio. So I have been thinking about that, and it's a half-formed answer on that front, but it's something that I want to chase after more. When I spent 20 years, more than 20 years living in New Mexico, and I don't think I necessarily wrote about the place there where I lived, but I was endlessly inspired by the light in the mountains and the cultures of New Mexico. So I think it was implicitly informing my work. And then the last thing I'll say to that is the part of the impulse of writing the Dug Up Gun Museum was to get out of the familiar spaces and get out of the places that had informed me. And I mean, get out of some of the same sort of bubbles of, the same frameworks of thought. And when I was traveling around, one of the things that I was really craving, or I felt like I was maybe on the right track of something, is when I got knocked back on my heels, and when I had my own sort of stereotypes about guns or gun violence, or I had my own sort of myopic thinking about it thrown back at me. So it was getting out of the familiar landscape that I hope has informed some of those poems. At least it was the impulse for many of them.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question that also I think ties to what I was just saying about the figurative and the literal, right? Because I think for me, essentially, it's not even only places where I've lived, but just places that have kind of an emotional resonance for me, which, yeah, a lot of that happens here in Massachusetts, which is where I'm from, by the way. Just so much has happened here. But also, random mountain ranges where I went when I was having a really bad time, a coast that struck me as being super intense for a variety of completely random reasons. Those things all to me kind of feel like they constellate. Also, to talk about those different associative leaps, right? They feel like they constellate onto real landscapes in which I've also lived. And then I also feel like there are landscapes that I've never seen that have something of an imaginative life for me, and different landscapes from space are probably the best example there, because I gotta tell you, I've never lived on the moon, but boy, does part of me think I have. And I think that for me, when I'm able to tap into the things that I find most emotionally true and emotionally precise in my poems is usually when I'm acknowledging multiple valences of place, real and imagined, fleeting and more embedded. On a kind of wine-related note, it would make a lot of sense for my personal life and personality that I would be a wine that comes out of like the Charles River. That tracks.
I honestly have no idea how to respond to that. So I'm just going to leave that where it is. I do want to say, on the subject of your fascination with space, every time I read Marigolds or hear you read Marigolds, I have to stop and check to make sure I haven't missed an announcement about life on other planets. Something I've been wondering about since I was a wee child. And when Sumita put it in that poem, I just believed it. So
that means a lot.
Sumita, I want to ask you, you've written about and spoken about your fascination with Emily's opening line, "After great pain, a formal feeling comes." And you've talked about that formal feeling in the sense of solemnity, but also poetic form and structure. Would you grace us with some of your thoughts on that, please?
Sure. I mean, I hope they'll be worthy of grace us. Yeah, I think that for me, a lot of my imagination is visual, and that also means in terms of poetic form. I think one of the places where we can get tangled up or feel at a remove from poetic form, especially for students who are thinking about traditional or inherited forms, right? One of the things that I think falls out of that conversation is that form is simply the shape that anything has, right? And in poetry, you've got other things that contribute to that shape, right? You got rhyme, you got meter, you've got all that magical good stuff. But everything has a form. We have a form, chairs have a form, poems have a form. And I think for me, that sense of form as shape is what largely comes to mind when I think about the poetic formal dimensions of after great pain, a formal feeling comes. And I don't have any kind of grand or macro statement to say on the level of poetics about this. I just have a statement about myself, which is that usually when I have experienced a great pain and it comes time to write about it, the thing that I will see first is not actually any words, not a image, not any kind of visual beyond the shape that I want the poem to take on the page. It's really a formal feeling. So the line has resonance for me in that way. Yeah.
Now that is definitely gracing us with your insights on that and your personal poetics, which, not that I'm getting a commission for this, but any of you who purchase Arrow will be able to see the shape that Sumita's poems take on the page. And there are a great variety of shapes and forms in there.
I feel like you just implied that you could be getting a commission for this, and I think we need to clear that up before this seems just too, he is not.
I am not. No, no. I say that completely out of my own admiration for Sumita's work. So, having touched a bit on form, at what point does form enter your considerations, Matt, when you are starting to write a poem? How does it serve and guide you?
I think there's been a handful of times where I've had an intuition that's a poem, for instance, if I wanted to write in a received form, like a sonnet, that the sonnet might be the appropriate form for that piece. But in terms of what Sumita was saying about, the shape of the poem or the stanza structure, that is a good deal of the ways into the draft process for me personally. I mean, my drafts are a mess. I'm fumbling and flailing, and I am not at all sure what the poem is wanting to say, let alone like what its final form will be, and then let alone how that content and form might fit hand in hand. So it's pretty far into the process, and I often am trying out different, whether it's in couplets or tercets or something that doesn't have regular stanza forms. I try out a variety of forms, and that can help me in the editing process to start to see what is really most valuable through that gradual distillation. So for me, it takes quite a while to get there.
Thank you both, because form is one of those things that, I used to think as a poet just sort of magically happened. And I have learned through many, many years of practice that it is something that there's a tension between the form and the content and my expectations and the reality of the poem. So I appreciate hearing both of you talk about that. I want to make sure that we have time both for some audience questions and also to offer you a chance to ask each other questions. Yeah. But I do have one final question that I am actually stealing from Matt, which is about literary and artistic influences. Matt has pointed out that there is a really wonderful line in Sumita's acknowledgements page in Arrow, where she writes, "I have limited these notes to direct, intentional provenances that the poems themselves do not fully explain. Other voices and reference, thankfully and invariably, also lurk." And in that spirit, I would like to know who the poets or authors are that you find most invariably and inevitably lurking in your lines, and to whom are you the most grateful?
I just want to acknowledge how awesome that line is in the acknowledgements. So thank you for using that verbatim, because I was really, it was so lovely to see. We were talking about the incongruous nature. Usually lurk and gratitude do not go hand in hand. So I really love the use, the verb use there. So all of that is to just say it's your turn to answer that question. I wanted to jump in and just say, excellent question, Michael. Yeah.
Thank you, Matt.
So I'm really happy that there are people who find a line that really arose out of deep anxiety to actually be delightful. Let me tell you first the completely true, unvarnished story about why that line exists. I was rereading Marigold's after having taught Anne Sexton, and I ran smack against my own, it is June. Anne Sexton has the line, "It is June, I am tired of being brave." Or maybe, is it, "I am tired of being brave, it is June," or "It is June, I..." That's my former student, everyone. Bland.
Thank you.
So I did not remember that line at all when I was writing and revising Marigolds. I didn't reread that poem for the 2 years, 1.5, whatever, long time it took to finish that poem. And what it made me realize, that experience of having taught Sexton and then ran smack into my own inadvertent echo was that in terms of what I'm grateful for is that I have had the great good opportunity after a really kind of bleak beginning to my life, the great good opportunity to read a lot of things that made a huge impact on me, not only in terms of making me like words and language and feel like I have a reason for getting out of bed and all that good important stuff, but also just have shaped the architecture of how I think. I owe a lot of that to pretty much every single writer or artist that I've read who has resonated with me, which made me realize that there are probably lots of things that lurk. And that's, I think, I hadn't thought before this exact conversation. Well, no, the previous version of this conversation. I hadn't thought about the contrast between lurking and gratitude, because I think for me, lurk spoke to ghosts and haunting and presences. And for me, most of those are not scary. They're just sort of a fact of life. And who am I most grateful to? Is that the other part of
Yes,
this?
please.
That's a terrifying question. I'm not going to answer it. I'm going to say all of the people who have written things that I love, and I'm not going to tell you who it is. Back at you.
So I believe that means you've taken the fifth.
Sure.
I've always wanted to lead a congressional inquiry, so we'll pretend.
What did I do?
You refuse to incriminate yourself.
I feel like Nick Nolte from The Wire. What the hell did I do? All right, I'm done talking. Your turn.
Thank you, Sumita.
Yeah, I have a ton of lurkers in my work, and that I think I don't know if this is how you meant the term, but I mean, also just people I'm borrowing from all the time, or I'm so thrilled by what a move that I see on the page, or the way they're working that line or that form, and so you know, I'm super grateful to have worked with people like Philip Levine in grad school. I mean, I'm just so grateful that I had a chance to work with him and have him destroy my poems in workshop before he died. I mean, I am deeply, deeply grateful for that. But then, you know, I feel like there's poems and poets that have come out even in the last 5 years, or, you know, even in the context of the pandemic, where I am just so, I don't know where I would be without them. And so, I mean, and I mean, for my own work, but also for my own well-being. And so, you know, like there's a book like Erica Meitner's Holy Moly, Carry Me, which I loved, which I'm so indebted to for my own book. I was reading so much when I was writing my own work. And then, yeah, I mentioned John Murillo earlier, and I had the really, I was thrilled to have a chance to read with him. But as I started into my poems, I got so self-conscious because I realized, oh, that's a total Murillo move. I totally stole that from him, and I could see it kind of looming on the horizon. I had to apologize to him afterwards, and he was gracious about it. But, you know, I mean, I am so grateful for his contemporary American poetry book, and then, I mean, how it's, again, informed my own work, but also informed my sense of the world and America, too, in poetry.
Well, thank you both. I want to now offer you the opportunity to ask each other a question, if you have one, and no pressure. It's okay. We have an audience out there who I'm sure have many wonderful questions.
I'm begging you all to please have some.
Can I ask a question about the B-Sides
Yeah.
series? I love these new poems by
Yeah,
Sumita.
yeah.
It's such a thrill. And I wasn't, so I'm not planning this question. So now I need to figure out what I want to ask you about this. There's so much I want to ask you. I want to ask you about how you are thinking about writing towards those elisions. You know, what is not there, what is not recorded, what is not maybe recordable, and what is your process for thinking about the contents of those B-sides?
Yeah.
Can I ask that?
Yeah, essentially just randomness. I mean, I keep a list of things that when it occurs to me that it wasn't represented on the original Golden Records, I just jot it down. And then I'll routinely kind of check the lists. Marianne Borick had this, I was on a lucky to be on a panel with her once where she gave a great metaphor for revision. And I think of it sometimes also, and mostly actually, for drafting. And it was when you revise your poems, you're like a doctor doing rounds in the morning. You go and check in on them every day until they seem to you to be well enough to leave the hospital. I thought that was truly fantastic. And I often think about that also with drafting, because again, the muse would be just so bored with me, just doing muse stuff. So I'll go back through the notebook and just look at what seems to be on the list that sparks intrigue for the day. And then, yeah, I think there's something that I'm having a lot of fun with and being really challenged by in those poems is that I think one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was don't make the speaker of your poems always a hero, right? So I do not want the speaker of these poems to be some sort of hero rectifying the record of how humans have presented themselves to extraterrestrials. That's a crazy problem and I can't fix it. And I mean, I think that that's where the royal we comes in as a decision, because what I'm really trying to write into is complicity, being a part of a collective that you're not particularly thrilled to be a part of, and yet having some sort of responsibility to acknowledge that membership. So usually when something from the list seems like it'll get me to a really kind of challenging place in that overall question, that's when I pick it, because I hate myself.
Awesome.
Can I actually have a question for you too? Okay, and you don't have to answer it if it's an annoying question. So you traveled throughout the United States talking to gun people.
Yes.
Discuss. No, but I mean, really, I think I'm interested in, everything about that, how you came to the decision that you had to do that rather than writing from your perspective that you had already, just as someone who is besieged by this news all the time. Like, what made you feel like you had to go out and speak to these people? And do you feel, or in what ways, if you want to speak to this, do you feel like that has exerted pressure or shaped the poems in a way that wouldn't have happened otherwise?
Yeah. I mean, I think, to be honest, the impulse, I mean, as I said earlier, I mean, came out of fear and grief over gun violence, but also the need to acknowledge that I don't actually know anything about guns. And so that, and I did find as I traveled around that was the easiest way to get gun owners talking, was just to say, look, I don't know anything. And then we would just start to have a conversation. And then, also stemming from a real concern about increasing divides in the country and a failure to have an honest, authentic dialogue, and a failure to even begin to imagine how the other person lives. So I'll just tell, but to also go to go to a city like Chicago and think, oh, these are the questions I want to ask. And I have the part of my travels in Chicago led to a poem called The Wrong Question More Than Once, like recognizing that how I was, even my framework of those questions was problematic or myopic. And also, I mentioned Machine Gun Vegas, and then I went to Machine Gun Vegas thinking, this is a really dark part of America, and it is. But I also learned that the owner of Machine Gun Vegas is a guy from New Zealand named Genghis Cohen, which was interesting in itself. But Genghis Cohen is a former military guy from New Zealand who thinks American gun laws are absolutely bonkers and just can't believe that. So anyway, I won't even go into that. But I met a guy in Cody, Wyoming, and I met many people in Cody, Wyoming who are liberals, who are progressive voters in every sense, but they grew up with guns. They grew up hunting. So I think I was thinking about gun owners in a monolithic way. We were talking about Michigan earlier, and my brother-in-law lives in Michigan, and he took me out hunting. He's an avid hunter, and he knew better than to give me a gun, and I didn't want a gun, so that wasn't even part of the discussion. But one thing I will mention, actually, maybe this as well, and this answer is that the hunters, I was with 2 duck hunters, my brother-in-law and his friend Coxie, and they knew so much more about the land and the wildlife than I do. And I felt so ashamed and humbled by that. I mean, you know, and my brother-in-law was talking about how when he was in 8th grade, he would have, you know, part of the hunter safety class was to be able to identify the species of ducks like on the wing of a sudden blur. And they were frankly better stewards of the land and knew so much more about the life around them than I did. And that was important for me to recognize too, rather than to say vilify.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, all of that is shaping so many of the poems in there.
Thanks. That was awesome.
Thank you both for those additional questions. Brooke, I think we're ready for audience questions.
Can I take the temperature of the room because it's chilly? That is the temperature of the room. It's chilly. What if we take one question and it'll be a really good one, I know, and then we'll have a chance to drink some wine, eat some cheese, and ask any more questions of these poets at the table over there where you can buy their books and where they'll be happy to sign them for you. So who's got one really, really good question? I did see a hand back here. Okay. No pressure, sorry.
Gosh, okay, well, I had a preface which is unrelated to the question, but it was something that I was very excited about. I think other people will like hearing about it. So that I am going to say it, which is that you guys said the thing about seeing the shape of the poem before you write it. And I don't know if this may not be something that you've read or maybe a thing that a lot of people said, but I got very excited because I once read an essay by Joseph Brodsky. And he says that all great poets, because he's Joseph Brodsky, he's obsessed with defining who's a great poet and who's not. But he says that all great poets hear the rhythm that they're going to write the poem in before they know what the words of the poem are. And I thought that was kind of cool because you guys were talking about doing it the same thing, but seeing the form visually. And he said that Akhmatova and all the other great Russian poets, which is a more metrical tradition still, hear it before they. I thought you'd think that was cool. Anyway, so the question I have to ask is, do you have thoughts on how you use stanzas or how stanzas and stanza breaks should be used? That's my question.
Do we have thoughts on how they should?
Yeah. Okay. We can tag team this.
Okay.
Kind of pass it back and forth. Okay. So the first thing to know is that it means room. So I think that in a more conceptual way, I'm trying to find you. Hi, there you are. Cool. In a more conceptual way, I think of a stanza as one of the rooms of the overall house or assemblage or haunted house or whatever the case may be, of the poem as a whole. I don't think there are many rules that I follow beyond that. I just really think about what the room needs to be, and I'll just say one thing and then kick it over. I have one poem in this book that is a single stanza that goes on for 12 pages. I was advised against it. I think that one thing, again, talking about the visual shape that you brought up, and thanks also for mentioning that Brodsky, I saw that poem as a giant monolith, like the big black box in 2001: A Space Odyssey, or a big grave or something like that. It's a poem that's about mourning my sister, and that leads me right back to room, right? Because what I wanted to do there was think a little bit about how mourning is not just a feeling, but also a way of thinking and processing stuff, and it feels like it goes on forever, but also is about one very small, specific thing. So it's one room. It's just one long room. So I'll pause there.
Well, it's such a great example of what I was thinking about, which is this idea that the idea of free verse, that is not a thing. And so in the sense that every decision you make in a poem matters. So it's not that there are no rules and you can just have at it. And like every choice in a poem in terms of its form will be affecting how the content is received, will be affecting its theme. So to think about, like, for you to have a single break in that room would have been utterly antithetical to what you were trying to do there. So, I mean, there's also no prescription. I think in a workshop, if someone says, oh yeah, well, this needs to be in couplets, you should be wary of that kind of feedback. But to raise a question of like, what would happen if this was in couplets, for instance, or in regular stanzas, or, jagged lines down the page, all of that has to be connected to the meaning of the poem if the poet is giving it the amount of thought it needs to have.
Yeah, and I know we're all cold, but this is a great question, and I'm a nerd, so I'm just going to add
Yeah.
one more thing,
Do it.
which is so for me, when I teach revision or talk about revision, one thing that I tend to emphasize is that the word actually means to re-envision.
Yeah.
So if part of this question is coming from not really knowing where to put in stanza breaks or knowing what they signify in a poem that you're reading, I can't recommend enough screwing it up. Marigolds that I read, it's in the pattern of a bunch of sonnets over and over. It's not officially a crown or anything like that, but it's the appropriate number of lines and the appropriate number of stanzas over and over. When I was revising that poem, at one point I put it into couplets in which the second line was indented, and I ruined it. Like, it hurt my brain. It went too fast. It was too kind of it was, I don't know how to explain it, but it was and it wasn't supposed to be So I think that doing things like that help you realize the stakes of the choices in ways that you maybe hadn't been alive to when instinctively putting them in. And you can do it to other people's work too. If you're looking at a poem and you don't really understand why it is in certain stanzas, copy and paste it somewhere, or type it all out, or write it out by hand in a completely different form, and then see how does that affect how you receive the thing you're looking at.
Well, this has just been an incredible conversation with these poets. Can we have a round of applause for them? Thank you. This has been Sumita Chakraborty, Matt Donovan in conversation with Mike Mercurio. We were hearing from Ed Robbins and Lesley Dill at the start of this program. It has been so wonderful to be with you all tonight. The Tell It Slant Poetry Festival brings you one more day of programs tomorrow, including a workshop on Dickinson's exclamation point. You don't want to miss that. And a panel on, could you hear it? It was in my voice, exclamation point. And a panel on poetry in translation. You won't want to miss the conclusion of the Emily Dickinson Poetry Marathon, which you can attend in person or online tomorrow. And we wouldn't be able to do any of this without the support of our festival sponsors, the Beveridge Family Foundation, the People's Bank, and Mass Cultural Council. Nor could we do it without your donations to keep this free and accessible program going. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for being here. Take good care of yourselves. Thank you, poets. Good night. Oh, and there's wine and cheese. Have wine and cheese.
Thank you. You did all that.